Hello, it's me again. Today I would like to carry out an experiment which is borderline physics and linguistics. If you take a sponge which is dry and parched and you try to squeeze some water out of it, it's impossible. You have to immerse it nicely in a bowl of water, and then when you squeeze it lightly, the water pours out. The same is with us and our language learning, which I'm going to explain in a second. So, sponge principle. This is a recording for everybody who's at the end of their tether because they are fed up with learning languages and they do not know what to do next. This is also mainly for my students. There's a Polish version available, unfortunately with crappy graphics at the beginning, for which I apologize, hence this English version. So, why is it so difficult to learn languages? Because, after B1 level, traditional methods no longer work, unfortunately. You need to do a little bit more. Even while preparing for first certificate in English examination, you need to expand a little bit. You can no longer use only books, only written materials in order to pass this exam well, or pass it at all. Unfortunately, we are living in the 21st century and organisers of these exams know it very well, and they prepare all kinds of materials based on the internet, on what's happening on television. That's why you need to expand, you need to immerse yourself in the language. So, why is it so difficult to understand certain languages, especially English? And based on my experience as an English teacher, I want to tell you about different struggles that my students encounter, that they need to face in order to understand and to learn and to use the language well in corporate environment, for example. So what we need to understand is the omnipresence of dialects in the West European languages, something we do not have in Slavonic languages, because for example the Polish language is more or less the same all over the country. Okay, there are certain regions like Silesia or regions at the seaside where people have their own dialects and their own words, their own way of pronouncing things. Nevertheless, it's not as varied as in Great Britain, for example, or in France, in Spain, in Germany. Each region, each state has their own way of saying things, whereas in Poland, when different people meet from different ends of the country, we more or less speak the same language, and we don't have something like in Great Britain that, for example, dialect and pronunciation changes within the radius of 20 kilometers even. So, for example, after a few words, two people, interlocutors, are aware of where the other one was born or lived for a longer period of time. We do not have that, and that's why, for example, my students struggle so much understanding people from the north of England or people from Scotland, Ireland, Wales. That's obvious, but still each region of the country has its own way of saying things. The next thing that we need to understand about the English language is that it is one of the most dynamically developing languages in the world. Every month, dozens of new expressions appear, which within this month may become so-called buzzwords. So everybody starts using these expressions, and the rest of the world have no idea what it's all about. That's why it is so important to follow the development of the language through television, through podcasts, through the written word. Incidentally, educated native speakers of English regularly consult dictionaries in order to look up the meaning of new words. Something which Polish speakers are never forced to do due to the constancy of our language. We have something like the Polish Language Council, which supervises the development of our language. So, for example, there are lots of expressions like poszłem, that everybody knows are wrong, everybody tries not to use them, and they have never been and probably never will be accepted into our corpus of accepted and appropriate words. Whereas in Great Britain, if a word functions in the public domain, After a certain period of time, it is accepted into Oxford English Dictionary, and then officially it may be used without any consequences. So, how did you acquire your mother tongue? Have you ever wondered? So, when you were a little baby and you do not remember probably those times, first you listened, you observed the world, you heard the different sounds, then you started emitting those sounds, trying to replicate what you've heard, and then you started producing certain words with mistakes. Your parents, your siblings, your friends started correcting you, hopefully affectionately most of the time, so that you weren't scarred for life for mispronouncing certain words. Then the educational system ensued, so you started learning how to read and then how to write. And it is important to replicate those processes, learning a foreign language, because those mechanisms are still in your brain. You are able to get hold of them, you're able to use them, but because we have become so wise, because we know so much about the world, and because we can read, we think that we can learn a language through reading. It is not the case, unfortunately. You have to listen a lot, and developing those appropriate habits, we recreate the process from our childhood, thanks to which we learned our mother tongue. So this is like going on a diet or attending a gym. You need to have the right habits. For example, in the morning while preparing breakfast, you switch on television in a given language you want to learn. You start listening. You do not have to pay too much attention. Let it play in the background, so let it hit your mind, especially in the morning. That's why listening to podcasts, for example, on your way to work is so important, because your brain is so absorptive in the morning. It just sucks all kinds of information and stimuli, and this is when you need to boost it with the right language. So what many people do not understand is that first we listen without understanding everything. So we use our imagination, we observe the body language of the speaker in order to understand more later on when we listen. This is a common misconception, because people think that, okay, when we learn a language, so let's say if I achieve an upper intermediate level, I will be able to switch on television and understand everything. No. First, you start listening, you start observing, even at those lower levels as a beginner, and then this skill develops. Unfortunately, it's a painfully slow process, but if done regularly, it does happen. Immersing yourself in a language, you'll see the results on average after 6 months. So, regularity, as I said, like going to the gym, like dieting, you need to be regular, you need to develop the right habits, and then with time you will see progress. You will notice that you're able to understand more. What's more, that you're able to use certain words and expressions that you had never been able to use before. While listening, we subconsciously acquire expressions which later we find in texts, and then our neurons connect words plus meaning. So, for example, this is something that I've observed among my students. I have seen it also in myself, that, you know, sometimes you just came up with a phrase, you're not sure if it's correct or not, then you consult a dictionary, and it turns out that, yeah, you were right, you just acquired it automatically. So this is the process I'm talking about. In stressful situations, like conversation with a native speaker, we perform better referring to our audio memory to our visual memory. So the latter takes our brain more time to analyze and retrieve. Think of a computer. If you try to reach a very short audio file or a very nice HD picture, which one happens first? Obviously the audio file. The same happens with our brains. When speaking, we refer mostly to our audio memory. Later on, we analyze and we reach our visual memory. If you do not stimulate your language center, and I have done this gesture on purpose because this is where your language center belongs, if you stimulate it regularly, if you're immersed in the language, you will not have problems saying certain things in a very natural way. So, to sum up, by listening regularly, we enhance our pronunciation, listening comprehension, fluency, intonation of a language. We do not incorporate sounds from our mother tongue in a foreign language. So for the Polish people, it is essential in order to be understood. Our vocalic system is totally different from English vocalic system. Our vowels especially are produced in a completely different way. So if you don't listen and you speak with a Polish accent, you may risk not being understood. People simply will not understand what you want to say. That's why it is important to listen as much as possible, because then you're able to produce the right sounds and at least you're understood. So, think of your brain as a computer deleting unnecessary files. Try to imagine that we're constantly recording the surrounding world with all the senses, so try to think of the amount of stimuli that we need to absorb every day. And, for example, for your brain, it is more important what you have eaten for breakfast than, you know, this boring English lesson on conditionals, for example, from 3 months ago. So, think of a recently visited city. You recognize the places during your next visit. You're able to go to the town hall, or you're able to find your way to your favorite cafe, and so on. So we remember various situations from our lives. They appear in dreams or while doing the dishes. And try to think of this boring English lesson. It's probably somewhere on the fringes of your consciousness, or even in your subconsciousness, although I doubt it. Or it's simply discarded. Your brain has removed this file because your brain thinks it's not important. If you do not stimulate your language center regularly, the brain will think that, okay, this is not an important area, and you will struggle if you want to speak the language. You just have to stimulate it every now and then regularly. Try to think of people who no longer use their native tongue, for example. Of course, you'll never forget it, but it gets rusty. You need to brush up on it, even with your native tongue. So, you know, our brain is an incredible machine that has a limited amount of space on each hard disk drive, and it needs to be stimulated in order to keep certain information. All handbooks are designed in accordance with this intuition principle, with an assumption of language immersion. Nowhere in the world do people learn foreign languages from books alone, only in Poland. I know it's a strong statement. I am Polish. I've learned from books alone, then I started immersing myself in the language, so I know what I'm talking about. All handbooks, they are various, and you know, they all make not much sense. So if you expect that everything will appear in the book, don't count on that. It will never happen. You just have to be your own teacher. In fact, your teacher at school, or I don't know, wherever you meet your English or language professor, language instructor, may help you, may correct certain mistakes, may draw your attention to certain things that you do not see, whereas try to become your own teacher. Try to become, try to be responsible for your language development. We've got the internet, we've got wonderful websites that may help you. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, this is the best English dictionary online. If you, for example, write in the word compile, you will see that it gives you definitions from, in this case, 43 dictionaries, some abbreviated definitions, so that you may know what it's all about, the pronunciation, if it works. It does. So in this way you're able to check all kinds of words, all kinds of meanings. So become your own teacher, be responsible, do not rely on the help of others. If you do not teach yourself, you won't be able to perform well in different languages. So I wanted to show you this diagram which exemplifies the differences between people who learned in accordance with grammar-focused language teaching and the people who were using this immersion technique, or which is nicely called in linguistics comprehensible input approach. So look, when it comes to grammar, reading, listening and writing, look at the differences. So people who learned according to this grammar technique underperformed, and people who immersed themselves in the language, they did much better than the other ones. I often have cases when people come to me and they say, okay, I need to practice more grammar because I do not understand or I'm not understood. No, if you listen to podcasts, if you watch television, you will notice that grammar used is very simple. In fact, you know, with mixed conditionals or variations in conditionals, or I don't know, inversion is used very, very rarely. Rarely is inversion used in real life. What we need is the melody of the language, is different little expressions that people use, and then you sound natural, and then you're good at what you're doing. Another thing that people tell me is, okay, so I started listening to CNN, BBC Wales, Sky News, and okay, I understand everything perfectly fine, but I'm not able to say it the way they say it. So, in your language center, you've got two dictionaries. You've got passive dictionary and active dictionary. Passive dictionary encompasses all kinds of words and expressions you've learned and you still remember because they were stimulated by regular listening to the language. And in the active dictionary, you've got the words and expressions you're actually able to use. So, the more you listen, the more you watch, the more you read, you expand this passive dictionary, which directly translates into your ability of using various words and expressions from your active dictionary. So the more you listen, the more you read, this expands, and this automatically expands. There is some kind of correspondence there. Practical ways of immersing yourself in a language. So, vom recording, something that I affectionately call in Polish słuchanki zżyganki. Vom from vomiting, they make you puke. So, for example, if you're a beginner or if you're more or less an advanced student, I bet you've never done this before, take all your handbooks you have covered so far, take the recordings and transfer them onto your mobile phone and start listening to them regularly until they make you puke, until you feel like you can no longer do that. You will be able to go over to podcasts. So in my second recording, I will talk a little bit about podcasts. Satellite television. You've got plenty of native speakers trying to invade your living room and show how their organs of speech work. Try to watch satellite television regularly, because you know, you've got the whole face on the screen, so you can observe how it all works, and you will mimic those expressions. As I said, those mechanisms from childhood, when we learned our native tongue, they are still there, they are still at your disposal. Try to use them. So watching satellite television every morning, every evening in order to relax. Remember, learning the language you're learning is your passion, is your hobby. This is how you relax. So for example, my principle is that, okay, whichever language you're learning, start with it. I mean, watching television, start from the programs in this particular language. If there is something interesting, continue. If not, after 5 minutes, you may switch over to crappy programs in your native tongue. But do it regularly. Let it be your principle. As I said, in the morning when your brain is fresh, and in the evening when you want to relax. Films with subtitles or without. I know you like watching films from the internet. Very often they are subtitled. Try to watch the films the second time without subtitles. Try to switch them off, and the second time you watch a film, try to focus on what they're saying. Not reading subtitles might be difficult because we automatically try to read them, but believe me, this is a good method, and you know, with time you will not need those subtitles at all. Very often the films, especially in Poland, are translated by different people, and very often they do not catch different intricacies of the language, and they castrate the films or series. So try to be wiser than them, and you can do much better than those people. Try to become an expert in this area. In my second recording I'll talk more about vocabulary lists, flashcards, podcasts, Kindle and bilingual books. I will also tell you a few words about how to prepare for a certificate. So basic rules, just to encourage you to watch this recording. Student's book, acquaint you with the exam format. You need to go through a grammar book on a given level. You have to go through at least 2 books with tests, so minimum 10 tests. Timing is of paramount importance, and obviously VOM recordings on your mobile phone from listening comprehension, because there is a certain principle that these exams are based on. I know that those texts come from different sources, and sometimes you might get an impression that they make no sense, but there is a certain philosophy behind it. And practice all examination assignments, speaking, writing assignments with your teacher, because doing it on your own may be slightly difficult. So, thank you for your attention. Hope to see you next time. Bye bye.